The 5 habits that gave me life. A 91-year-old's gift to middle age. Sit down, dear friend. Let me pour you some tea and tell you something that might change how you think about the years ahead. You know, when people see me at 91, still driving my car, still tending my garden, still reading 3 books a week and remembering every detail, they always ask the same question. What's your secret? And when I tell them it's not what they think, I can see the disappointment in their eyes. They want me to say it's good genes, or that I was wealthy enough to afford the best health care, or that I discovered some miracle supplement. But here's the truth that might surprise you. I come from a family where most people died in their 60s. My father had his first heart attack at 58. My mother developed diabetes at 55 and struggled with it until she passed at 67. My older brother died at 62 from complications of high blood pressure. And as for wealth, I worked as a school librarian for 40 years. I raised 3 children on that salary. I've never owned a luxury car or taken expensive vacations. So no, it wasn't genetics or money that gave me these extra decades of vibrant life. It was something far simpler and paradoxically far more powerful. 5 daily habits that I discovered, refined, and practiced with the devotion of a monk for over 50 years. I can see you shifting in your chair, perhaps thinking this is going to be another lecture about diet and exercise. But please stay with me. What I'm about to share isn't just about adding years to your life, though it will do that. It's about adding life to your years, especially now, when you're beginning to feel time's gentle but insistent tap on your shoulder. The wake-up call that changed everything. I discovered these habits during what I now call my breaking point, though at the time, it felt more like my breaking apart point. I was 47, the same age my father had been when he started having chest pains. I was working full-time, raising teenagers, caring for my aging mother, and somewhere in the middle of all that, I had completely lost myself. I remember the exact moment everything crystallized. It was a Tuesday evening in October 1980. I was standing in my kitchen, looking at a sink full of dishes, when suddenly I couldn't breathe. Not because of panic, though God knows I had plenty to panic about, but because I realized I had been holding my breath for what felt like hours. Maybe days, maybe years. That's when it hit me. I wasn't living. I was surviving. And barely that. The next morning, I made a decision that my children still tease me about. Instead of rushing to get ready for work, I sat down at my kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a notebook, and I wrote down a simple question. What would it look like to actually live well? Not to be rich or famous or successful by the world's standards, but to live well, to feel alive in my own skin, to be present for the life I was actually living instead of constantly rushing towards some imaginary future where everything would finally be okay. That question led me to 5 answers. 5 simple practices that, over the next 4 decades, transformed not just my health but my entire relationship with life itself. The first habit. Morning pages, the conversation with myself. The first habit might surprise you because it has nothing to do with what you put in your body or how you move it. It's about what you do with your mind, specifically with all those thoughts that swirl around in there like leaves in a windstorm. Every morning, before I do anything else, before I check the weather, before I make my bed, before I even brush my teeth, I sit down with 3 blank pages and I write. Not about anything in particular, not with any goal or agenda. I just let my hand move across the paper and capture whatever wants to come out. Some mornings it's my grocery list bleeding into worries about my grandchildren, bleeding into memories of my late husband, bleeding into random observations about the cardinal at my bird feeder. Other mornings it's pure frustration, pages and pages of complaints about my arthritis, or the state of the world, or the fact that my neighbor's dog barked all night. I discovered this practice quite by accident. In those early days after my wake-up call, I was seeing a therapist, something that wasn't as common or accepted then as it is now. Dr. Martinez was a kind woman who listened to my endless stream of worries and responsibilities with infinite patience. But she was expensive, and after 6 months, I realized I couldn't afford to keep seeing her. You know, she said during what we both knew would be our last session, you might try writing to yourself the way you talk to me. Just put it all down on paper. Don't edit, don't judge, just dump it out. So I did, and what I discovered was remarkable. My mind had been carrying around conversations that needed to happen, fears that needed to be acknowledged, dreams that had been buried under years of practical concerns, anger that had never been expressed, joy that had been forgotten in the rush of daily life. But here's what makes this practice so powerful for someone your age. It gives you back your inner voice. Somewhere in our 40s and 50s, many of us lose touch with what we actually think and feel because we're so busy responding to what everyone else needs from us. We become experts at meeting expectations and fulfilling obligations, but we forget how to listen to ourselves. The morning pages changed that for me. After about 6 months of daily writing, I started noticing that I had opinions again. Real ones, not just reflexive responses based on what I thought I should think. I started making decisions based on what actually felt right to me, not just what seemed most practical or what would make others happy. And here's the beautiful thing. When you start listening to yourself again, your body starts talking to you too. Through those pages, I began to notice patterns. Days when I felt energetic versus days when I felt depleted. Foods that made me feel clear versus foods that made me foggy. Relationships that filled me up versus relationships that drained me. The morning pages became my daily check-in with the person I was becoming, not just the person I had always been. And that person, I discovered, had some very interesting things to say about how she wanted to live. The second habit, the 20-minute walk, moving toward life. Now I know what you're thinking. Here comes the exercise lecture. But please hear me out, because what I'm about to tell you about walking has nothing to do with burning calories or lowering your cholesterol, though it does both of those things beautifully. I started walking because I was angry. About a year into my morning pages practice, I began to notice how much frustration I was carrying around. Frustration with my job, with my teenagers, with my mother's increasing needs, with my husband's tendency to retreat into television when life got complicated. But mostly frustration with myself for feeling frustrated about things that, on paper, looked like the ordinary challenges of a blessed life. One particularly difficult day, I remember it was raining, and I had just gotten off the phone with my daughter's school about some crisis I can't even remember now. I found myself standing in my living room, vibrating with an energy that had nowhere to go. Without thinking, I grabbed my raincoat and walked out the front door. I had no destination. I just walked. Down my street, around the block, through the neighborhood, past the park, along the creek that runs behind the elementary school. I walked for about 20 minutes, and when I came home, something had shifted. Not solved, just shifted. The frustration was still there, but it had space around it now. It wasn't consuming me anymore. So I did it again the next day, and the next. Rain or shine, hot or cold, tired or energetic. 20 minutes. Just 20 minutes of putting one foot in front of the other and letting my mind wander wherever it wanted to go. What I discovered was that walking is a form of meditation in motion. When you walk at a comfortable pace, not rushing to get somewhere, not trying to achieve any particular fitness goal, your mind naturally settles into a rhythm. The repetitive motion of your feet seems to organize your thoughts in a way that sitting still never could for me. But here's what makes walking so crucial for someone your age. It's practice for showing up consistently for yourself when you don't feel like it. Because let me tell you, there have been thousands of mornings over the past 4 decades when I absolutely did not want to walk. I was tired or busy, or the weather was terrible, or I had a million other things to do. But I walked anyway. And in doing so, I learned something that has served me in every area of my life. I could trust myself to do what I said I would do, even when, especially when, I didn't feel like doing it. That's a kind of self-confidence that you can't get from achievements or accomplishments. It comes from the daily practice of keeping small promises to yourself. And it builds a foundation of self-trust that carries you through everything else life throws at you. Over the years, my walks became sacred time. Time when I worked out problems without trying to work them out. Time when I noticed the changing seasons, the neighbors' gardens, the children growing up in the houses I passed every day. Time when I had some of my best ideas and some of my deepest insights. But most importantly, those daily walks taught me that movement is medicine for the soul, not just the body. When you move your body regularly, you're practicing aliveness. You're saying yes to your physical existence in a world that increasingly invites us to live only from the neck up. The third habit, one real meal feeding the temple. Food was my enemy for most of my adult life. Not because I had an eating disorder in the clinical sense, but because somewhere along the way, eating had become just another task to complete efficiently rather than an act of nourishment and pleasure. I grabbed breakfast while packing lunches for the kids. I ate lunch at my desk while grading papers. Dinner was whatever I could throw together quickly between homework supervision and household chores. Food was fuel, and I was always running on empty. But around the same time I started walking, I began to notice something through my morning pages. I was writing a lot about being tired. Not just physically tired, but tired in a bone-deep way that sleep didn't seem to cure. And I was getting sick more often, colds that lingered, headaches that came and went, a general sense of my body struggling to keep up with my life. Then I had lunch with my friend Margaret, who had recently returned from a year in Italy. She was glowing, there's no other word for it. Her skin was clear, her eyes were bright, and she had an energy I hadn't seen in her for years. "What happened to you?" I asked. She laughed. "I learned how to eat," she said, and then she told me about the Italian approach to meals, how they would spend an hour or more at lunch, savoring not just the food but the conversation, the company, the simple pleasure of nourishing themselves well. "Americans eat to fuel up," she said. "Italians eat to celebrate being alive." That conversation planted a seed that took several months to sprout. I started paying attention to how I felt after different meals. I noticed that when I ate quickly, standing at the counter or while doing something else, I felt scattered and unsatisfied even if I was physically full. But on the rare occasions when I sat down and ate slowly, focusing on the flavors and textures, I felt nourished in a way that went beyond nutrition. So I made myself a promise: one real meal a day. One meal where I would sit down, put away all distractions, and eat like someone who deserved to be nourished well. I started with dinner, since that was the meal I was most likely to share with my family. I began setting the table properly, not with fancy china, just with real plates instead of paper ones, real napkins instead of paper towels. I started cooking one thing from scratch each day, even if it was just a simple soup or a fresh salad. But the real magic happened when I started eating slowly, really slowly, chewing each bite completely, putting my fork down between bites, tasting the food instead of just consuming it. What I discovered was revolutionary. When you eat slowly and mindfully, your body tells you when you've had enough. The constant battle with portion control and willpower that had plagued me for years simply disappeared. I started eating less naturally without trying to eat less. But more than that, I started enjoying food again. I rediscovered the pleasure of a perfectly ripe tomato, the satisfaction of a well-made soup, the simple joy of bread that tastes like something more than packaging for other ingredients. And here's what makes this practice so important for someone your age. It's never too late to change your relationship with food. You don't have to overhaul your entire diet or follow some complicated plan. You just have to start treating yourself like someone worth nourishing well. One real meal a day became my daily practice of self-respect. It was a way of saying to my body, to my life, to myself, you matter enough to do this well. And when you start treating yourself like you matter, everything else begins to shift. The fourth habit, the evening review, harvesting the day. The fourth habit came to me through necessity. As my children became teenagers, I found myself lying awake at night, my mind spinning with worries about all the things that had gone wrong during the day, and all the things that might go wrong tomorrow. The hamster wheel of anxiety was exhausting, but I couldn't seem to step off it. One night, after hours of tossing and turning, I remembered something my grandmother used to do. Every evening, she would sit in her rocking chair for a few minutes before bed, just sitting quietly. When I was little, I thought she was just resting. But when I got older, I asked her about it. "I'm collecting the day," she said, "like picking flowers from a garden. I look for the good moments, the small victories, the things I'm grateful for. And I also look for the lessons, the mistakes I made that I can learn from. Then I put the day to rest so it doesn't follow me into tomorrow." So I started doing my own version of this. Every evening before I got into bed, I would sit on the edge and ask myself 3 questions. What went well today? What did I learn today? What am I grateful for today? First, it was difficult. My mind wanted to focus on everything that had gone wrong, every mistake I had made, every problem I hadn't solved. But I forced myself to find at least one answer to each question, even on the hardest days. Gradually, this practice began to change not just how I ended my days, but how I lived them. When you know you're going to be looking for good moments, you start noticing them more. When you know you're going to be extracting lessons, you start seeing mistakes as information rather than failures. When you know you're going to be counting your blessings, you start recognizing them as they happen. But here's the deeper gift of this practice. It gives you perspective on your own life. Day by day, you're so close to your experiences that you can't see the patterns, the growth, the subtle ways you're changing and evolving. But when you step back each evening and reflect on what happened, you start to see your life as a story that's unfolding, not just a series of tasks to complete. I kept a small notebook by my bed and wrote down my answers to those three questions. Over time, I accumulated hundreds of pages of small victories, lessons learned, and moments of gratitude. Reading back through them became one of my greatest sources of encouragement during difficult times. This practice is especially important for someone your age because midlife can feel like a time of loss, loss of youth, loss of certain possibilities, loss of the illusion that you have unlimited time. But the evening review helps you see that you're also gaining things every day. Wisdom, perspective, resilience, deeper relationships, a clearer sense of what matters. When you make a habit of harvesting the good from each day, you stop taking your life for granted. You start seeing that even ordinary days are full of small miracles, and you build a reservoir of positive memories that sustains you through the inevitable difficult times. The fifth habit, morning stillness, the Buddhist teaching that saved my soul. The fifth habit is the one that ties all the others together, and it came to me through the most unexpected source. My teenage son's rebellion. When David was 16, he went through what we might generously call a difficult phase. He was angry at everything, at me, at his father, at school, at the world. One day, in the middle of a particularly heated argument about his curfew, he shouted at me, "You're always doing something. You never just exist." I was offended at first. Of course, I was always doing something. I had a house to run, a job to do, a family to care for. But his words stuck with me. That night, during my evening review, I asked myself, when was the last time I had just existed? When was the last time I had been still? Not because I was exhausted, but because stillness itself had value. I couldn't remember. Around that same time, the library where I worked hosted a lecture series on world religions. One of the speakers was a Buddhist monk named Brother Thomas, an American who had spent 20 years studying in monasteries in Tibet. His topic was the practice of presence, and something about his calm, centered demeanor drew me in. He talked about meditation not as a religious practice, but as a way of training the mind to be where it actually is instead of always racing ahead to the next thing. He described it as the practice of befriending your own life. After his talk, I approached him with what I thought was a sophisticated question about the philosophical foundations of Buddhism. He listened politely, then smiled and said, "Would you like to try sitting still for 10 minutes? I almost laughed. 10 minutes? I had been sitting still for his entire hour-long lecture, but something in his gentle manner made me nod. He showed me the simplest meditation technique imaginable. Sit comfortably, close your eyes, and pay attention to your breathing. When your mind wanders, and it will, gently bring your attention back to your breath. That's all. But what's the point?" I asked. "The point," he said, "is that there is no point. That's what makes it so valuable." I didn't understand what he meant until I started practicing. Every morning after I finished my pages and before I went on my walk, I would sit in my bedroom chair for 10 minutes and try to follow my breath. It was, without exaggeration, the most difficult thing I had ever attempted. My mind was like a wild horse. It bucked and reared and ran in every direction except the one I wanted it to go. I would start by noticing my in-breath, and within seconds I would be planning dinner or reliving a conversation from work or worrying about my mother's health. But slowly, gradually, something began to shift. Those 10 minutes of practicing coming back to the present moment started to affect the rest of my day. I began to notice when my mind was racing ahead to future problems or replaying past mistakes. And I began to have brief moments of actually being where I was, experiencing what was happening right now. The Buddhist teaching that Brother Thomas shared with me was simple but profound. Suffering comes from wanting things to be different than they are. When we're constantly fighting against reality, wishing we were younger, richer, healthier, that our children were different, that our circumstances were different, we create our own misery. But when we learn to be present with what is, without judgment, without the constant need to fix or change or improve, we discover something amazing. This moment, exactly as it is, contains everything we need. This doesn't mean becoming passive or giving up on goals and dreams. It means learning to distinguish between what you can control and what you can't, and finding peace with both. For someone your age, this practice is pure gold. Midlife is when we're forced to confront the gap between the life we thought we would have and the life we actually have. We can spend our energy raging against that gap, or we can learn to find richness and meaning in the life that is actually ours. The morning stillness practice, those 10 minutes of simply being present with whatever arises, taught me that I don't have to fix everything, solve everything, or be everything to everyone. I just have to show up fully for my own life, moment by moment. How these habits weave together. Now, you might be wondering, how do these 5 simple practices add up to the kind of vibrant health and energy I have at 91? Let me tell you how they work together. The morning pages clear the mental clutter and help you hear your own inner wisdom. The walk moves the energy and insights from your writing through your body and into the world. The real meal nourishes not just your body but your relationship with pleasure and self-care. The evening review helps you learn from your experiences and build gratitude. And the morning stillness creates a foundation of peace that carries you through whatever the day brings. But here's the secret. None of these practices work because they're magical. They work because they're consistent. They work because they're sustainable. They work because they address not just your physical health, but your mental, emotional, and spiritual health too. When I started these habits 50 years ago, I didn't see dramatic changes overnight. But day by day, month by month, year by year, they accumulated into something profound. They gave me tools for handling stress, for maintaining perspective, for staying connected to what matters most. They helped me navigate my husband's death 10 years ago with grace instead of bitterness. They've helped me stay curious and engaged as the world changed around me. They've helped me maintain my independence and my joy even as my body has aged. But most importantly, they've helped me understand that vitality isn't about being young. It's about being alive. Fully, consciously, intentionally alive, regardless of your age. The gift of time. You know what I've learned in my 91 years? Time isn't running out. Time is running through. It's flowing through you like a river, and you get to choose whether you're going to dam it up with worry and regret, or let it carry you toward whatever comes next with curiosity and grace. Right now, in your 40s or 50s, you're at the perfect age to make this choice. You're old enough to have learned some hard lessons, but young enough to apply that wisdom for decades to come. You're experienced enough to know what doesn't work, but flexible enough to try new approaches. The early signs of aging that are starting to appear, the creaking joints, the slower recovery, the gray hairs, the realization that you can't eat or drink or stay up late the way you used to. These aren't signals that your best years are behind you. They're invitations to live more intentionally. They're your body's way of saying, pay attention, be present. Stop taking this life for granted. I know it's tempting to think that you need to make big, dramatic changes, to overhaul your entire lifestyle, to commit to extreme diets or intensive exercise programs, to revolutionize everything all at once. But that's not how lasting change happens. Lasting change happens through small, consistent actions that compound over time. Your 5-habit journey. So here's what I want you to do. Don't try to implement all 5 habits at once. That's a recipe for overwhelm and failure. Instead, choose one, whichever one resonates with you most, and commit to it for 30 days. If you choose the morning pages, set your alarm 15 minutes earlier and write 3 pages by hand before you do anything else. Don't worry about what you write. Just write. If you choose the walk, put on comfortable shoes and go outside for 20 minutes every day at the same time. Don't worry about pace or distance. Just move. If you choose the real meal, pick one meal each day and eat it slowly without distractions, with full attention to the flavors and textures, and the simple pleasure of nourishing yourself well. If you choose the evening review, spend 5 minutes before bed reflecting on what went well, what you learned, and what you're grateful for. Write it down if you can. If you choose the morning stillness, sit quietly for 10 minutes each morning and practice paying attention to your breath. When your mind wanders, gently bring it back. Do one habit for 30 days. Really commit to it. Show up for it even when you don't feel like it, especially when you don't feel like it. And then notice what changes, not just in your body, but in your mind, in your relationships, in your overall sense of well-being. After 30 days, if that habit feels established, add another one. Give yourself another 30 days to integrate both practices. Then add a third, and eventually a fourth and fifth. There's no rush. Remember, I've been doing this for 50 years. You have time. The real secret. But here's the real secret, the one that took me decades to fully understand. These habits aren't really about health or longevity. So they certainly contribute to both. They're about learning to live on purpose instead of by accident. They're about choosing to engage with your life instead of just enduring it. When you write in the morning, you're choosing consciousness over automaticity. When you walk every day, you're choosing movement over stagnation. When you eat mindfully, you're choosing nourishment over numbing. When you reflect in the evening, you're choosing wisdom over oblivion. When you sit in stillness, you're choosing presence over escape. Each of these choices, made consistently over time, adds up to a life lived with intention. And intention, my dear friend, is the real fountain of youth. I'm 91 years old, and I can honestly say that I'm more interested in life now than I was at 50. I'm more curious, more grateful, more present, more alive. Not because my circumstances are perfect, they're not. Not because I've avoided all suffering, I haven't. But because I've learned to show up fully for whatever life brings. That's what these 5 habits have given me. Not a guarantee against aging or illness or loss, but tools for meeting whatever comes with grace and resilience and even joy. And that's what they can give you too if you're willing to begin. So begin. Today, right now, choose one small practice that calls to you and commit to it for the next 30 days. Your 91-year-old self will thank you. But more importantly, your tomorrow self will thank you. Because when you start living intentionally, every day becomes richer, every experience becomes deeper, and every year becomes a gift instead of a loss. This is my gift to you, not the promise of eternal youth, but something far better, the possibility of a life fully lived, no matter how many years you have left to live it. Now go pour yourself some tea, sit quietly for a moment, and decide which habit you're going to start tomorrow morning. Your new life is waiting.